Okay guys, today I'm going to show you a multi-part replacement project we got going on here. This is a radiator and condenser change on a 2004 Dodge Dakota. So the context here is I got in a little fender bender, went over a bump that was a little too big, and now underneath you'll see a big old dent right there, and then underneath that this radiator and condenser are both bent to the point of not working. You can actually see down here, this piece is broken and this condenser at the bottom is totally beat. So what we're gonna end up doing is pulling off this front member, pulling off the shroud, pulling off the fan shroud, which ends up going back here. We'll pull out the electrical fan, we'll pull the old condenser out, we'll pull the old radiator out, and then at a later time, which will be in a couple of days, I'll put in the new stuff. So without further ado, let's get started. And the first thing I'm gonna do is start small and take off this shroud here, which covers a portion of the condenser. One of the things before we get started here, I've got a bunch of plastic bags here. This is going to be a lot of parts that are going to come off, so I'm going to end up putting them into plastic bags, labeling them where they go, ideally if I remember what size they are, and that way we'll keep everything organized as it comes out, so then it goes back in the same way. I'm also on my notebook just going to write down the order in which I take all the pieces apart, so I know to go in reverse order going back in. Now you might be saying, well, why don't you just plan ahead and know what to do? Well, I did, but nothing ever goes fully to plan, so we're going to start with what we start with and finish what we finish with and write it down as we go. Okay, first things first, like I said, we're going to start small and pull this shroud cover off. So I've got a little screwdriver that's almost like a miniature crowbar piece here, and we're just going to gently wedge these little snap fittings out. There's one. I believe there's one here, but mine's jammed through. And then there's another one here. Nothing special to this. You're just kind of wiggling in a gentle way to get these to work themselves out. Got the top two off. Here's what the inside of those little things look like, and all you do is sit and wiggle them out. There's actually a third one down here. You should be able to see it just make out that circle there. So we're gonna take that one out too. Next up, now that the condenser shroud's gone, if you guys wanted to, this is your time to just replace your condenser. You would disconnect these here, disconnect these, and then there's two bolts down at the bottom here, one here, and then one down here where this whole thing comes off. I'm gonna take off this top bar first because, well, that's what I feel like doing. So I'm going to take these pieces off here. This is the hood latch. Now, these, from everything I've heard research-wise, they have a spot that they like to be in, and you don't really want to move them from this bar if you can. So if you're doing this quickly, it's not going to rain, anything like that. You would disconnect these bolts, two here, two, and then one up here, and lift this whole thing up. Here's your hood latch cable. And that you would just kind of set off to the side. I'd say, you know, not near your battery because it's all metal, but you'd set this whole thing off to the side. I am not going to do that. I'm just going to pull these pieces off because my hood is actually having issues anyway, so it might be an opportunity to adjust. But what I will do is take a marker and just mark where these sit, so and hopefully I could line it up when I put it back together. Take the trunk latch off. They're just these two bolts here. They're just 10 millimeter. Do this, I'm trying ever so gently to put this little Sharpie mark right here. So I'll do that again on this side. Oh, this is gonna be so hard to see, but what this is gonna do is help me line this up. Saw, it's just a 10 millimeter, couple of bolts, nothing fancy. So I'm gonna get this popped off here. There's the trunk latch disconnected. Like I said, it's only those two bolts, but you'll see it's got these big square openings, so that way you can sit, adjust this wherever it's gotta go. For right now, I'm just gonna let this hang down here, and I'm gonna take my bolts and store them someplace safe. The next thing I'm gonna take off is the actual AC condenser. So I've got a 13 millimeter. This seems a little bit loose, but it'll do the job. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna loosen these lines first. And you might be asking, well, hey, there's potentially a lot of Freon in here. Well, considering my AC's leaked like crazy, there's not a whole lot left in here, but this is where you would want to evacuate your system beforehand, and that is unfortunately outside the scope of this video, so good luck to you guys. So these bolts, I got a hell of an extension. I just have a 6-inch extension, a 3-inch, and then a little universal joint. And then this is these little bolts are 10 millimeter, and here's what they look like when they come out. They also have a Torx head on the inside if you'd prefer to use that. I've just got the socket, so I might as well use the socket port. There we go, one old condenser unit. Now once you disconnect these two bolts, there are just a couple O-rings on the end of these tubes. These are these little fellas, if my camera will focus here. So I'm gonna take a look at these and make sure they're in decent shape. All right, let's take a look at the damage, shall we? Yeah, that's pretty beat up. So we're gonna replace this and get a brand new one. Well, where do I want to go next? Let's move this top bar piece. Oh, for anybody curious, you should have a sticker on the top of your truck that says how much fluid to put in it. So this is R134A, and I need 29 ounces of material. So I'm gonna make sure I pick up 29 ounces when I run to the store. Now let's work on this top bar. So these, I'm just gonna go right around and pull all these. These are 13 millimeter. 13 millimeter. These are 13 millimeter here. These are 13 millimeter, these are 13 millimeter. The only ones that are not are these rubber grommets that actually hold the radiator in. So here's a portion of your radiator. So these, I believe, are 10. So first pull those off. They're 10 millimeter, and they're about, I don't know, that long. They sit pretty far in here. And then this little rubber boot just pops right out. So I'm gonna pull these bolts from the top and then take this cross piece off. There's all the bolts, so nothing special on that. This whole thing, just grab each one of them. For the two that are usually here, I just use an open-ended wrench. It was a little slow, but yeah. Right, now this piece should, of course it doesn't want to come out. And there we go. There's the front of it. Now, you might be thinking, well, why don't you just pull this whole thing off? Well, it's actually attached to, one, the engine through the radiator hoses, two, the radiator reservoir through a couple screws at the top, and the fan shrouds, which are right behind it. So now we're going to be doing the work from the radiator back to get all of this stuff, you know, out of there, so that then we can pull the radiator out and then fix any tubing as we go. So for this side, this is the passenger side. You've got the pump, which we're actually going to disconnect this tube down here and then the electrical. You've got this level sensor indicator here, and all we have to do is pull this wire connector off. Then there's a 10 millimeter screw down here. I just took that off, so you can actually see this will give a little against that. So what this is this piece is actually mounted to the radiator through a square nut that's inside here. And on this side, we have a nearly impossible to find second bolt, which is right there. We're looking right at it. And then that'll help this top piece come off. All right, so maybe I can park you up here and hopefully there's a view. Maybe that's half decent. I'm gonna go get the screwdriver before I hurt something. If only actually knew how to take these wire harnesses off. And I broke the clip. Great. Okay. Does this go in? Does this go out? Do I peel up on the bottom? There we go. So you pull up on the bottom. And watch me break this one too. Oh, we almost got it. How do people even design these things? Nope. Okay. So what I'm going to do is try to put these in a spot where they won't get hurt. Okay, so those are disconnected and you can watch my draining washer fluid, but oh well, fluids are cheap, I guess. What you could do to stop this is if you had like a piece of, I don't know, rubber or something that you could put around this. I'm clearly way too dumb for that. So we're just going to move on to the next piece over here, which is that one bolt way down there. And to get to it, I've just got a 6-inch extension with the universal joint and that 10 millimeter. And we're going to get that set right where it's got to be. And just be careful not to strip this, because stripping anything really kind of sucks, but this isn't in that tight. All right, now we've got this thing out, but there's a tube down here. This is for the overflow. I'm gonna disconnect that, and you can see my leaking washer fluid. I'm just gonna end up tilting this, so hopefully I keep some of it in there. And that's this cover. So now we're gonna start moving down towards some of the stuff down here. Okay, so now all that we've done so far is we took off the condenser, right? Because I have to replace that anyways. We've taken off the front crossbar that comes in front all the way across, and we've taken off the fluid reservoir. So on the one side it's the washer fluid, on the other side it's the coolant. And now here's what we've got. We've got the front of the engine, we've got our 2 radiator hoses, upper and lower. We've got this electric fan that's going to come out. This piece is actually going to be able to stay, and I'm hoping I can keep this lower radiator shroud in place, but I might take it out. We're going to see. So next thing to do is get at this electric fan, which has a screw here, and then it would have one right there where you can see that little gap. Mine looks like it broke off, and then it's got one more down at the bottom, which is here. They should all be 10 millimeter. Now on the bottom is a electrical connection that you'll have to undo, and then the whole thing should be able to come right out. Okay, so to get this lower shroud off, there's a bolt all the way down here, and all I can really do is point at it, but it's right down here, and you know, right next to the battery. On this side there's another one that's actually beneath this lower radiator hose. I'm gonna see if I can get to it standing up. I'm just gonna go in the car. Okay, now you guys should be able to see I disconnected those 2 bolts on this fan cover, and we're gonna see if I can get this fan shroud up and out. Okay, so with my shroud still in there, couldn't figure out how to get that out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take off these transmission bolts, and then I'm just going to write on these maybe like a little T or a little, you know, a little B for top and bottom or something, so I know which one goes where. Fingers crossed. I think they're supposed to be unique, but you never know. But I am going to give those some good penetrating fluid, and then all that's left after that is to take off my lower hose and my upper hose. So I'm going to get started with these and get them soaking in some penetrating fluid, and then go from there. What an absolute miracle. So I just have a crescent wrench here. After I gave it a little spritz of penetrating fluid, I'm actually able to take this out. Guys, it's a miracle. Let me tell you. So we're going to work on this top one, and then you guys can laugh as I jinx it and totally mess up the bottom one. The important thing here, I believe this is a 16 mil, by the way, but I don't have a 16 millimeter open head wrench. Be careful, take your time. These are, if you strip them, you're in real trouble. You have to get a kit and try to get these to fit back again. So anyways, the other thing is be careful too, because they'll spill out. So I'm just gonna crack this one open and go from there. There's one. I ended up just wrapping this. I didn't want any schmutz, you know, I have a bunch of sand in here. I didn't want to get any of that into my transmission line, so we're gonna let that one sit. I marked it here with a T for top, so now I'm gonna work on this bottom one and see how it goes. The heck, two miracles, guys. Got this bottom one loose here, and I'm draining transmission fluid all over the place, so I'm gonna get this one out and get this radiator out. And favorite part, the radiator hoses. So we're going to pull both of these off, and then this whole radiator should be able to come right out. There we go. One radiator. You guys might be able to see, but look at that bend. This thing took a beating. And that's the whole removal. So now what I am gonna do, now that I can get the shroud out, is actually clean up the inside of this bay here. Clean up the inside of this bay. See if I can get this piece of metal to bend back somewhat, and then yeah, well, go from there. I'll get the new parts coming in tomorrow, so then we'll be able to put it back together. I'm also going to clean up a bunch of this electrical schmutz that's here, and yeah, that's it. All right, so what I'm doing here, I've got my new radiator, which is in nice good shape. You can see everything looks good seeing through it. It came with a set of clips and a couple square nuts that I'm placing in various positions around it. What these are is they allow for things to thread into it, right? You have all the bolts when you take it apart, and the new one came with these clips so that you can thread into it. Because right, this body is only plastic. So there's a couple square nuts and a couple spots for these clips. And the way to tell is the spots for the nuts, or the square nuts, flip that around here, look like this, and then on the back side have a spot to hold that nut. It looks like a little containing space, whereas the spots for clips have a groove right here where the clip sits into. So that's it. I'm just walking around putting all these on. Now to install these clips, you want to have the portion that sticks out facing in towards the body of the radiator, and that just lets your screws tighten a little tighter. All right, time to put the radiator in. So the other thing to note from what I've seen is sometimes kits won't come with these rubber grommets, which are kind of bushings, I guess, or ones on the bottom. There's a couple feet down here where you need something that ends up looking like this, where this portion is what the radiator sits on, and then this sits into these cross members down here. So last thing I'm going to do is give this a little bit of a hose out. We're gonna see, and then put the radiator in. Okay, fellas, moment of truth. We're gonna try this, and the keyword is try, and then the second keyword is be careful, or carefully. I'm not exactly an English major. Okay, so we're gonna put this cable out of the way for now. We're gonna make sure that this line is over here, and then we're just gonna gently. Okay, so I've got my old spring clamp here, which is not really ideal, but I'm not gonna lose too much sleep over it. And I'm gonna slip this around the hose first, and then push this fella on, just like that. And release this way too early, but whatever. Push this a little bit more forward. Put you over here now, and why don't you give this a shot. Open this up. Put the hose on. Wiggle, 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 wiggle. And release. All right, radiator hoses are done. Now guys, here's a top-down view. So here are my two transmission lines. Those are what are gonna get put back in next. And I have seen these types of flare fittings really strip, really seize up. So what I'm gonna do is actually put just a freaking dab, of anti-seize on these threads, and then I'll put a little bit on the inside of that flare just to help it, not seize up, not become an issue down the line. So I put a little bit of anti-seize on here, and it's kind of tricky to see, but you can actually see it right under there. See how that's that light gray color? That just has this spinning a lot more freely. And then this O-ring here, I believe it's this red fella here. Usually these can get damaged on the way out. So what I'm gonna do is I should replace it, but I'm just gonna take a little bit of WD-40, put it on my finger and lubricate that. So when it goes in, it's not gonna be, it's less likely to get hurt. There's one. So the learning from this one as I tighten this up is be careful not to cross thread this. It'll go in, it'll cross, and it'll cross thread the heck out of itself. So make sure it's good, and then you don't have to tighten the shit out of these. You just have to get them good and snug. And that's it. So nothing special there. On to the bottom one. All right, new radiator. Who dis? And it looks like we have a good bit of extra clearance here. So I'm gonna try to put that electric fan in, and we're gonna hope and pray, and we'll see if that fits in here. All right, so here's where I'm gonna diverge from the norm here. So normally you would actually have clearance here, and you would put your lower fan shroud back on. I have like zero clearance here all the way around. In fact, I'm actually concerned about my radiator hose getting nicked here. That's how tight it is. So I don't really have any room to put that shroud back on and have my fan. And I'd rather have the fan than have the shroud. So we're gonna skip putting the shroud back on and just put back on the electric fan, and then everything else will be normal. So I've got a handful of my screws from last time around, and I'm gonna line them up and then put them through. And these, if you recall, will actually sit into the square nuts that are present. And it's kind of a little bit of a guess and check here with lining this up. There we go. There we go. That feels good. Nothing special. I'm just holding this up a smidge as I tighten it, and then I'm going to come back with my 10 millimeter and tighten them up. All right, now normally, again, you'd have 3 bolts, but I'm missing this fella, but this is going to be okay. It's a little flimsy, but I'm not going to lose too much sleep over it. So that's that. Now to put the upper shroud and the reservoir back on. Well, it looks like I'm having a clearance issue. I can't get that upper shroud back over this tube, so I'm going to take this off and try it without. All right, now it's connected, and remember, all there is there's a screw here, and remember, here's one of those clips that we put in, and you might be able to see in there just a little bit. That rusted part is that screw, so all it does is it threads through there, through that clip, and then there's just the, goodness gracious, there's just the bolt right there, so nothing special to that. Now I'm just going to reconnect these sensors, and you should be able to see there's actually a good bit of sand in here, so I'm going to blow that out and then can take my connectors and plug them in. All right, and that's all hooked up. Now remember, I just used a Sharpie here, so I wrote L. This is the level sensor, so plug in level L to the level sensor, and then this clip is for the washer pump itself, and then this connection here just press fits on there. You don't need to secure that or anything. It's not running at that all high of pressure. All right, let's see what's next. All right, I'll park you guys up here. There's not a whole lot special to this. You just kind of grab it. I'm cleaning mine off, just a smidge. With my dirty hands, you know, how to be ironic. And then this just sets back in there. And I'm beating this down, but how you say, carefully. And alrighty, here are all my bolts, and I definitely have clearance issues, so we're gonna pick and choose the ones that fit, and I don't know, try not to worry too much about the rest, to be honest, guys. There's one. I'm gonna see if I can get this fella in on this side. All I'm gonna do is actually lift this up. Now watch me cross-thread the hell out of that one, guys. And literally none of these are gonna line up on this side. All right, we're just cooking here. Like I said, I got my open-ended wrench here, getting these last two bolts tightened in. Nothing special, 13 millimeter. You can use a socket or one of those ratcheting wrenches if you've got one. Nothing special. Okay, folks, the last thing to do is fill it up with coolant. Now, there's a bleed screw here, which I'm going to use to fill, but you can also fill from this cap here, which is in theory, it's at the highest point of the coolant system. I don't exactly know how I buy that, because these are the tubes that go into the heater core, and those are basically the same height. So now the process here, I'm going to fill this. I'm going to fill this up with coolant and water in a 50-50 mix. You can buy pre-diluted coolant, which is nice and easy, but I'm a cheap guy, so I'm going to use the actual concentrated solution and then mix it with distilled water. And you use distilled water because you don't want any extra minerals to eventually corrode your system. You want nice, clean, pure water. All right, folks, so I'll show you how I did this while it's running here. So basically, I have my bleed screw open. I stuck a funnel in there that just so happened to fit, and all I did is I filled it, you know, as much as it could go with coolant and water, kind of flipping between those to make sure you get a 50-50 mix on it. Now all I'm doing is I'm running the engine, and then I've got my heater core on. I've got the heat on in the truck, and what that's doing is it's letting coolant flow through those tubes as well, and then any air should in theory come out right here. So I'm watching it, I'm filling it up as we go. I'm making sure that, one, this doesn't run empty, but two, that material is still flowing out. You might see a bubble there, here, or there. And then I'm letting it letting that fluid work itself in, work itself through. And the big thing I want to do is see the thermostat open up, which is at the bottom near the water pump. So once the engine gets up to temp, I should see that thermostat open and material flow through this system. So we're going to keep an eye out for that and see how she goes. Okay, everyone, new condenser just arrived, and this one is black. So nice, cool color. Now to put this on, all you do is fit it into these slots, these little hanger slots that sit on the radiator. And then there are 2 screws at the bottom, one right where my finger is pointing to, and it ends up going through there. And then one over here in that same approach, right down here and then connecting here. So really it'll fit like that. So I'm gonna grab my screws and screw them in. These screws are in, nothing special here, just the old screws fit through, and they actually fit through those square bolts that you put in to the radiator when you put the radiator in. So now all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna connect up my lines, and I've got one here that's gonna sit through here, and then one at the bottom. Now, the only thing I'm gonna do here that's not super intuitive is I'm actually gonna take a little WD-40 and wet these O-rings, and that just helps them go in smoother and without getting torn, and it'll help them last longer. Now to do this, I've just got a little WD-40 on my finger. Just gonna wet that down, like I said, just with my finger, nothing special. You don't need to douse the heck out of it, but you want to make sure that it is wet so it'll slide into this opening pretty easy. Okay, so my condenser did not come with these pieces here. Now how they work, they're just a double-ended thread, and they sit through here into your one-piece threads into your condenser, and then you tie a nut around this other piece, and that holds this tube in place. So considering that mine didn't have it, I'm just putting this, taking the ones from my old condenser off. And then to get them off, they have a T7? Something? E7? Something? Torx head. And all you do is you grab onto the end right here, and you can either thread them or unthread them. Now in this case, I'm gonna be threading them on, but when I took them off my old one, I unthreaded them. And then when they sit in, they're both the same, so it doesn't matter which one you pick. And then all I'm doing is I'm hand threading to start to make sure I don't cross thread anything, and then I'll come back with the ratchet and tighten these up. There's no torque spec that I know of, but it's not a crazy vibration area. You don't need to really crank on these at all. Just get them tight, get them decent, and then go from there. This part I might not be able to show you guys, but I'll try here. There we go. So to put this on, I've got my existing line. Just gonna fit that over. I'm gonna guide this in to start, make sure everything's lined up, and that presses in. I'm gonna put this nut on, hand tighten it. Get it half decently tight, and then I'm gonna come back with my ratchet and tighten that up. And here's that. I've just got an open-ended wrench here. Same thing, tight but not impossible to get loose. And I had a little bit of WD-40 on my finger, so that'll just help that prevent any rust from building up and seizing that on. But again, I'm not sitting here cranking this down, just a good and tight. That is the condenser installation. And again, if you were just doing the condenser, that is all you would do. Disconnect these here, pull out the old condenser by loosening the bolts at the bottom, put the new one in, and that's it. But now that that's done, I'm going to set up my vacuum system and start vacuuming out these lines to make sure everything's nice and clean. So now I'm setting up my vacuum gauge. I've got my pressure gauge here. The center line is yellow, and that goes to the vacuum pump. The blue is for the low side or low pressure portion of your AC, and the red is for the high pressure port, as you can see here. Now on this truck, the tubes are set up so that you can't set them up incorrectly. These two pieces are different sizes, but here, this is my low side and this is my high side. So I'm gonna get this set up and I'll show you how it looks as we're going here. All set up. These are basically a bigger version of quick connect fittings if you guys have your own like compressed air at home. So one's there, and now we're going to test the system. All right, we got our pump running here, and you can see our pressure on the low pressure side is slowly dropping. And now all I've done is I have my valves open, and all I'm doing is running this vacuum pump. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna run this, get down to, see how low it can go in maybe 5 minutes or so. And then we're going to close these upper valves here. I'm sorry, we're gonna turn off the vacuum pump and we're gonna see if this pressure stays where it is right now. Because basically that tells us that everything in the AC system is sealed. And that's what we want. We don't want any leaks. All right, so I've let this run for about 10 minutes and I've just turned off the vacuum pump. So all I did here, I closed these two valves, and that basically seals off the vacuum portion from the rest of the AC. And I'm gonna watch this gauge for just a little while and make sure that it doesn't tick back up. That would indicate a leak in the system. So I'm gonna let this sit for 15-20 minutes, I don't know, maybe a half hour, and just see where this needle is. I'm also gonna take a picture of this as is, just so I try to be consistent in the way I look at it. All right, so it's been 25-35 minutes and my gauge is right in the middle of where it should be. Didn't really lose anything, which was good. So now I'm gonna run the pump a little bit longer and just get out any extra moisture. I'll probably shoot for like a half hour, 45 minutes. Change in plan, folks. So what I ended up doing, took my gauge set off, flipped on. I bought one of these AC recharge fells that has the hook up here. And I've got it's got a little dial on it. I threaded it into my 12-ounce can, and I'm just gonna ever so slightly pull that trigger until I can hear it. And the reason I'm doing that is because if you let out too much refrigerant too quickly, it'll get cold and can either freeze or expand very quickly once it heats back up, which is not good for your AC system. So I'm just slowly letting this out, and I can actually feel on my hand the temperature. I'm using that as kind of a guide.